Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us in today's webinar, The Purpose and Aims of the 4-Day Week. My name is Elizabeth White, and I'm the team lead of Learning and Development with the Work Wellness Institute, and I'll be helping to host and moderate today's webinar. I would like to just start off by acknowledging that I have the privilege to live and work on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. We would like to thank our academic team and our 9 founding partner organizations in the Harnessing Talent Project, Harnessing Talent Alliance for Recruiting and Retaining Canadians with Disabilities and Mental Health Challenges, and a 3-year project that's funded by Employment and Social Development Canada. This webinar is made possible through the support of ESDC, as well as memberships to WWI, and we would like to thank our advisory committee and of course our speakers who contribute to our webinar series. While we are just giving everyone a chance to join, I'll take a couple of moments to go through some housekeeping points. Hopefully at this point you're both hearing me as well as seeing our initial presentation on the screen, and that should be coming through whichever speakers that you've chosen to listen to us here today, or through the conference call line if you chose to dial in. In terms of your communication portals with us, please look to your GoToWebinar menu where you'll see a question box tab, and that is your main communication with us today. So if you are experiencing any types of technical issues or you have comments or questions, we will be interacting today with different question periods. So please feel free, don't hold back, use that questions box to submit anything that comes to your mind. And we also will have a dedicated Q&A session as well. And that is where we'll catch all of your great questions later on. If some questions about post-webinar is already coming to the surface, please do know that this session is recorded and we will be distributing that link as well as any presentation materials post this webinar as well. And if you have any kind of initial questions, we do have an FAQ. If you look to the handout menu in GoToWebinar as well, there is a WWI FAQ there for any kind of common questions that we do get from a technical side. A quick note to our members, WWI organizational members, ARPA Australia, a reminder that you will receive automatic certificate of attendance, as well as our individual members will do the same. Looking to today's presentation, we are very excited to have Andrew with us today. He has made a career of market-changing innovation and industry digitization. Most recently in New Zealand, Andrew made worldwide headlines by announcing the 4-day week as the founder of Perpetual Guardian. The result has seen him and his partner establish 4-day week global and the 4-day week global foundation. Their vision for this is to provide a community environment for companies, researchers, academics, and interested parties to be able to connect and advance this idea as part of the future of work. He is on the advisory boards of both the US and Ireland 4-day week campaigns and the board of the newly created Wellbeing Research Center at Oxford University. And he's also the author of the 4-day week book, a how-to guide for companies trying to reduce work hours and increase productivity. Thank you so much for your time today, Andrew, and I will pass things to you.
All right, okay. Is my big screen showing yet, or do I have to hit a button?
Yep, your screen is showing fine.
Okay, are we working?
It looks like we're working.
It's showing, okay. All right, good. Cool. Morning, I guess, everybody. My name's Andrew Barnes. I am an accidental campaigner for, to say, because when I started on this journey, which was about 4 years ago, I was trying to deal with a problem that I think is pretty universal, which was trying to work out why productivity in my business was potentially not as good as it might have been. And I was on a plane flying to the UK, and I read a research report which was about productivity in the United Kingdom and productivity in Canada. And the report said that the Brits were productive for 2.5 hours a day, and I genuinely don't know what you guys are doing, because it said the Canadians were productive for 1.5 hours a day. And what I wondered was actually, was that happening in my company? And I was trying to work out what it is that would cause that poor productivity. And I figured it was probably things like being interrupted at work, probably spending too much time in meetings. I mean, it's a fascinating statistic that if you get continually interrupted at work, it's the equivalent of being on the influence of marijuana. So I thought, what would happen if I gave my team a day off a week and asked them to rethink how they might do things? And so the 4-day week idea was born, and it was very simple, really. It was based fundamentally on productivity. We had to, as also business retail house, we have 17 retail branches across New Zealand. And I also had to be sure that we were able to continue to deliver on our customer service. When I raised this with my team, I effectively said that, look, I absolutely have no idea how to do this. So what I need you to do as a team is to go away and rethink what it is you do, how you would do it better, what it is you would stop doing in order that we can do the work in 4 days rather than 5. And the deal is, if you can, then what I'll do is I'll gift you that day off. Now, it was very much an individual contribution point, in that under our legislation in New Zealand, we couldn't do, just blanket change contracts for this. So we had to get people to opt in where they would agree to follow the principles of what we call as a productivity policy. And effectively, that means that we would agree that we would gift them 40 days additionally off a year, but provided we were getting the levels of output and productivity that we'd agreed. They were also able to choose the day off, subject to the constraints of the operating the business. So fundamentally, as I said, we can't close. So not everybody could take Friday off. Not everybody could take Monday off. What we did is, in effect, you say you bid for your day, and if you were getting Friday this week, you probably wouldn't get it next week. The only people who I mandated to do this was my senior leadership team, because I felt that if they didn't walk the talk, then it wouldn't happen. And then finally, the thing that we did, and I now claim absolute credit for it as clearly a far-sighted genius, was that actually we got academic validation. That was a complete fluke. It happened to be that one of the researchers at Auckland University of Technology read about the trial that we were proposing to do and approached us and said that could he run some academic research. And so we ran a program of qualitative and quantitative research alongside the trial, which was actually pretty helpful, because I had independent directors in the form of my private capital partners were in. And what I needed to be able to do was to demonstrate that actually this was something more than just a completely crazy idea. So what happened? Well, quite simply, engagement scores, so leadership commitment, stimulation, empowerment, those scores went up 40% through the trial. Trial was an 8-week trial, which we then extended to 3 months. Stress levels in the company dropped 15%. And more people in the organization said they were better able to do their job working 4 days rather than 5. At the same time, we actually managed to improve the productivity of the organization. We talk about job performance being maintained. In essence, it actually went up about 20%. So the organization became even more efficient than it was before. We also found that our teamwork scores, our readiness for change scores, our team creativity scores all went up as well. And this has led to this policy that we now call the 100-80-100 rule. 100% pay, 80% time, as long as we get 100% of output. Now, it shouldn't work, right? There is no reason why this should work, because we all sit there and we all say that we are incredibly busy. But the reality is, a lot of the day we are doing things that, whilst they make us feel busy, are not actually contributing to the bottom line. Now, one of the best examples of this is the Microsoft Japan trial, where during the Rugby World Cup, Microsoft in Japan ran a trial to see what would happen if they also switched to a 4-day week. Now, they made effectively 3 rules. No meeting longer than half an hour, no more than 5 people in a meeting, and please use Microsoft Teams. And what they got was a 39.9% improvement in productivity. In our own trial, we saw things like the amount of internet surfing, for example, on the top 5 non-business related internet sites dropped 35% through the trial and afterwards, because people were starting to change behaviors. And in many ways, this is as much about changing work behaviors as well as it is about changing processes. So to be honest, when I did the initial trial, there was very little process improvement that went through. What we actually did is we did things like the quiet hour. Now, the quiet hour is based on the thesis that in an open plan office, you get interrupted once every 11 minutes, and it takes you 22 minutes to get back to full productivity. So if you can gift people an hour where they're not interrupted, then in essence, you're getting about 3 hours of proper productivity out of that 1 hour. So a lot of the techniques that we used were all about dealing with this. And that was fundamentally things like not allowing you to eat your lunch at your desk, because if you had that reheated curry at lunchtime and everybody's feeling good about that, it's disturbing the person next to you. If you have a meeting table in between the banks of desks and you have an internal meeting there, that's disturbing people. So we moved those little meeting pods away to a different part of the floors, and we put sound deadening material around them. So it dropped the noise levels. So what we found at the end of the day is that the behaviors that people adopted, changed behaviors, were the things that led us to better productivity. Now, I try and think about, well, why did that occur? And the reality was it was the stories that people started to tell. You know, a father who picks up his daughter from school for the first time, and you know, the child runs across the playground, flings her arms around his legs and says, "Daddy, what are you doing here?" Or the grandfather who walks home twice a week, takes 2 afternoons off, and his granddaughter comes round and they do grandfather granddaughter stuff, and then they have tea together when she goes home. And when he talked to me about it, he cried. Because what we're giving people here is we're giving people the gift of their lives back. We're giving them the time that matters to them. And because we're giving them something that is so precious, frankly, they are going to do everything they can conceivably do to keep this policy alive. Because it's not just another gym membership, it's not another meal at a canteen, it's not free life insurance. This is something that is personal and matters, you know, solely to you. Now, I thought, to be honest, when we did this, that what we would get would be, I don't know, a story in our local rag and maybe something on our local television station. And I was right, we got both of those. But then what happened was this incredible global tsunami of news, whereby we stopped counting when we got to about 14,000 interviews, articles. And as it's happened since that experiment back in 2018, you know, this has never stopped. I've currently spoken in 100 countries worldwide on the topic. Now, why that's relevant is not that they're talking about Perpetual Guardian or they're talking about me. Why it's relevant is that I believe that this is a issue that transcends, all borders, all cultures. And actually what we're seeing here is that, the population, the working population of the world is saying, look, how do we do things differently? How do we find a better way to work in the 21st century? Now that in turn prompted us to create this thing called 4-Day Week Global, which is our not-for-profit. And what we do now is we basically travel the world, supporting governments, supporting companies, and talking about the 4-day week and why we think that this is actually a better way of working for the 21st century. We also created a foundation to fund our research. So a key part of what we're trying to do here is actually to make it safe for organizations all the way around the world to do this. Now, I should say that this is not the hardest thing that you will ever do. When we're talking about the projects, we talk about not overthinking this. And the reason we say that is that to implement a 4-day week in an organization is not something that is driven from the C-suite. The C-suite has to enable it. The C-suite has to empower the organization to actually make those steps towards changing the way you work. But this is actually something that has to come from the bottom up of the organization. Because what we're asking people to do is to commit to do things differently. And what we talk about here is reduced hours working. That's what the 100-80-100 policy actually means. The 100-80-100 policy is all about, thinking about this issue of reducing the hours that you work. It is not about compressing, 40 days into 4 days. It is reducing it down to 80% of that time. Now, our experience of Perpetual Guardian has also morphed from the days when we were allowing people to take a day off. So what we now do is we have a fully flexible policy where we are trying to get it back to a 80% time. So we allow people to either take a day, they can take 2 half days, or working parents actually can work 5 days a week. Now that's logical because what they want to do is they want to be able to take the kids to school in the morning and pick them up in the afternoon. So they work 5 days reduced hours. If I gave them a day off, it wouldn't help because actually they still have to pick the children up on those other days. So we've gone to a fully flexible reduced hours working. And when we talk 4-day week these days, that's what we mean. The reality of having the 4-day week moniker is it's clickbait. Everybody can understand what that means about having a long weekend every week. And that's the way the journalists go with that. But that's not what we're talking about here. Now, the key thing about this, because it is employee-led re-engineering, it can apply to almost any industry. In fact, I think it can apply to any industry, any business, in any jurisdiction, anywhere in the world. Why do I say that? Because what you're doing is asking the people who are doing the jobs to identify how they can do them better. Now, there are some great poster childs for this. So, for example, Volkswagen manufactures cars on a 4-day week. Panasonic does electronics on a 4-day week. The greatest exponent or the leading exponent of the 4-day week in Spain is a restaurateur who runs several restaurants. And in both the United States and Europe, there are health professionals that are going on to the 4-day week. And a lot of that, when you look at it, is talking about what's the broader benefits to society. And I'll come back to that a little bit later on. We also know it is used in things like agriculture, and 1,600 school districts in the United States are now on a 4-day week. So what I thought I'd do is just point out some of the other companies that have been on this journey and some of the very early research that is coming out of those organizations. So you're not just sitting there going, well, Andre's talking about his business, fantastic, wouldn't work in any of those. What other evidence have we got? Well, this is Bolt. Bolt has 550 employees. Now, interestingly, when they surveyed the staff after putting this process in place, 84% of them said they were more productive. 86% said they were more efficient with their time. And 84% had better work-life balance. Now, interestingly, you get two other things from this slide. One is the biggest resistance comes from your managers, always, because we're all conditioned, we're conditioned to think that working longer is about working harder, where this program is all about working smarter. And the second point here is there is always a group of people in our company at any point in time. We reckon about 15% of the organization doesn't do a 4-day week. Now, of those, some of those are new employees that have come in, and we make them work 5 days until they've done it for a couple of months, creates a baseline in effect about the working week, and then they shift over to the 4 days. But there's always about 8 to 10% of the company, for varying reasons, say, I want to work 5 days a week. Now, that's for a whole heap of things. That one of the best examples of this is a business in Bangladesh that asked its staff why they didn't want a 4-day week. They found, of course, that the staff was largely young, female. And when they pressed the point, they said, well, it's quite simple. Our mother-in-laws are at home, and the last thing we want to do is spend a day in their company. So sometimes there are cultural things that make a difference. Indebted here. What is the interesting stat at the bottom is probably in the light of the Great Resignation, that they received a 283% increase in applicants when they went to a 4-day week model. Now, interestingly, some research has just dropped out of the UK in literally the last week that says that job advertisements and applications for 4-day week jobs have gone up 200% in London and the south of England. On average, across the whole country, they've doubled over the last 6 months. So there's an awful lot of traction. Arwen shows the same thing. I mean, they got 1,000 employees. They're seeing their applications also went up. Yes, they were more productive. Yes, they got better employee engagement. But the other key statistic here is that one at the top, with staff absenteeism reduced by about 59%. Now, in our own organization, in the 4 years since we made the policy permanent, it became a permanent policy in 2018, our sick days have also halved. That seems to be a consistent trajectory that starts to be being reported by organizations across the world implementing this sort of policy. Now, when we first started, I decided that the reaction to what we were doing at Perpetual Guardian was so extraordinary that I thought we ought to do something about it. And I guess that was best brought home to me when my partner Charlotte and I, who works with me on the 4-day week global, were driving the Peking to Paris car rally in 2019. And we had just crossed the border into Siberia. And the phone rang. And they said, do you realize you've just been name checked by the Prime Minister of Russia, who has looked at the Perpetual Guardian trial and he has said that it's the future for Russia. We thought, that's quite cool, put the phone down, rang again, and they then said, where are you? And we said, well, we're in Siberia and we're heading to a city called Novosibirsk. And they said, well, Moscow television crews will be waiting for you on arrival. We were late arriving. I think we broke the clutch. I was covered head to foot in grease and dirt, but did 4 back-to-back interviews for Moscow television. And 2 weeks later, when we left the country, there was an announcement that the Parliament was drafting 4-day week legislation. That was the point at which we decided, rightly or wrongly, that you don't get many chances to change the world. And that's when we started to establish 4-day week global, and also to build on our policy that had been from the get-go that we would share absolutely everything that we found about our business, about the impact of the 4-day week with anybody who asked. So the 4-day week website has literally everything we have ever done, down to how we structured the contracts, how we communicated with the staff, and so on. Now, the other problem I had was I literally couldn't drink that much coffee with chief executives around the world who were calling up and trying to tap our brain as to how we did it. So what we then did is we started to create these big pilot programs. We started in Ireland, then we launched the USA and Canada, then we've just launched the UK in terms of they've just started their work. And then we've got one in Australia and New Zealand. We've got another one in Israel. And we are literally recruiting now for 2 new pilots in Canada and in the United States. And what those are a coordinated 6-month trial of the 4-day work week. Now, in the context, say, of the UK one, it's now going to be the largest independent trial of a 4-day week anywhere in the world. We have 73 companies involved. And what we do is we do a lot of pre-planning with the organizations. We do some training, virtual events, digital resources, workshops. We give each company a mentor company that's actually done it before. We try and pick a business in the same industry that isn't a competitor, possibly from a different jurisdiction, so that they can share their experiences. It's a very, very generous community, is the 4-day week community. I think we're all thinking that we're part of a revolution. It gives you an opportunity to network with other pilot companies. Because as I said, it's quite a lonely call, right? For a chief executive to stand up and say, we are going to work less, and I'm betting that we are going to make more and produce more. There's a whole audience out there who thinks that's not possible. So if you do this alongside other companies, it just makes it a little bit safer. And then the final piece of this, which was born out from our own experience in New Zealand, was this whole question of actually having research and analysis so that we're able to prove at a corporate level just exactly what's going on. Now, our research is coordinated by Professor Juliet Shaw out of Boston College in the United States. I mean, she has been researching, writing on this topic for about 25 years. And so she has run the first research programs that we did. Now, whenever we do a pilot in a country, we partner with a university in that country. So in the case of Ireland, it's University College Dublin. In the case of the UK, it's Oxford and Cambridge universities, Auckland University of Technology, and then Australia, we have the University of Sydney, and we have the University of Queensland. So what we're looking to do as those pilots, country-specific pilots, come out, that we will then be bringing in more and more academics. And we're looking now to launch pilot programs in Spain and in Germany will be the next 2. Now, what we collect here is productivity data, retention data, absenteeism, energy use. We look at employee well-being and stress and satisfaction. We also then are looking at what people are doing with the time, how it's impacting on how they get to work, how much transport and infrastructure they're using, whether it's changing care and household responsibilities. And then at the end of it, we sort of do a big wash up with both management and employees. And the idea is each company will get data specific to their organization, but at the same time, we'll look and produce sanitized data that runs across the whole of the trial. And that's important not just for the organization, but the next stage of what we want to do is start to provide macro data for governments to enable policymakers to start to rethink how this might work. Now, what I've just got here is some hot off the press, is some data from one of the companies that is a large company on the US trial. And what you're seeing here is progressively the drop of work time, improvements in life satisfaction. You're seeing stress levels drop, you're seeing burnout drop, you're seeing improvements in physical and mental health. This is very early on in the piece, so it's the sort of trajectory that we're expecting, but it's worth sharing in terms of this is the type of data on these sort of issues that we are actually, pulling out from our varying research trials. Now, I guess if you'd asked me, other than being somewhat shocked that Russia was an early mover in the 4-day week, if you'd asked me 4 years ago that actually country after country would be implementing 4-day week legislation, I would naturally have thought that you were sucking on dream tablets. But as I sit today, and that's today, tomorrow there is likely to be another country on the journey: Scotland, Ireland, Spain, Israel, Japan, India, Russia, New Zealand, the United States, Finland, Belgium, Lithuania, Romania, Portugal, and yes, you read it correctly, the UAE are all moving to either implement trial programs or are actually legislating for 4-day weeks. So Lithuania, Romania, Portugal, Belgium, and the UAE have all done that. Now, if you think that this sort of revolution can't hit the United States of America, then 7th of December 2021, the Congressional Progressive Caucus of the Democrats endorsed the 4-day week bill, which was dropped into Congress by Representative Mark Takano of California. Now, it got the support of over 100 legislators. This is a political movement now that is growing and growing with great strength, and it is likely to come to a jurisdiction near you. As I said, we've spoken in 100 countries worldwide. We'll do the 101st country tomorrow, which is Nigeria. Now, I literally have talked in every single continent of the world. So this is an issue that is now transcending borders and cultures. And when asked, it's broadly consistent. Over 80% of workers say, you know what, I need a 4-day week. Now, let's look at the broader benefits away from the company that this brings. And so it's addressing a couple of things. It's addressing the fact that today's younger workers are not prepared to work the way that their parents did. In turn, if you look at what we are doing, the 5-day week, that is a construct of the 1920s. I mean, there is debates as to which particular entrepreneur brought it in, but a lot of people credit Henry Ford for it, that he introduced the 5-day week into his car plants in the 1920s and 30s, and took about 5 years to do it. And he did it for two reasons. One, he obviously felt he could improve productivity. The second thing is that he felt that actually, if he gave his employees more time off, they would go out and buy his cars. And he was sort of broadly proven right. What I think we've got to ask ourselves is why a form of working devised for repetitive manufacturing in the 1920s is vaguely relevant for the way we work in the 21st century. Now, one of the things here is about what does this do if you give more people more time off, and how does it benefit society? Now, this is a piece of research that was done out of Henley Business School, looking at about 500 UK companies that were doing some form of reduced hours working. And then you start to look at this in the context of the big issues that are facing, 21st century society. Right, we have diet, obesity issues. 55% of workers said they would use the additional time for home cooking, not, getting that fattening or high salt takeaway. 49% said that they would do exercise. In an environment where we are staring down the barrel of the impact of AI that might well destroy 40% of jobs, 48% of people said that they would actually do some study. In other words, we're creating time for them to upskill themselves to face those challenges, and 40% said that they would improve their work skills. Critically, 43% and 39% respectively said that they would do more social things, cinema, theatre, eating out. These things that actually in turn are have the potential for driving the economy. No different from the view that Henry Ford took back in the 1920s. 24% would care for sick or elderly relatives. Now, again, a key thing here is changing the balance of care responsibilities. If you make it okay for male employees to take time out, then actually you've got a better chance of rebalancing the split of care responsibilities. For example, in Ireland, 98% of care responsibilities are done by women. And it doesn't matter how many times we keep helping to bring women up, if we don't push our male employees out of the office and give them not just the opportunity, but empower them to take up their share of care responsibilities, it's always going to be a little like an uphill struggle. And 23% that they would set up potentially their own business. But for me, one of the big benefits here is the health benefits that this brings. So at some point in time, in your workforce, 1 in 4, 1 in 5 will have a stress or mental health issue. In the UK, work-related stress, anxiety, depression accounts for about 60% of all working days lost to ill health in a year. So that's 17.9 million working days annually, with a lost output cost of between 33 and 43 billion pounds a year. So when I talk about this being a sensible, rational business as well as a social solution, this is where this comes from. Not only are you seeing that companies are seeing better productivity, but if you start to think about what is the impact of society if actually we're able to make a healthier, happier workforce, in turn, that workforce doesn't get as sick. Remember, we've halved our sick days in the last 4 years. And that in turn takes the pressure off the health service. And if the health service pressures reduce, you've obviously got a better chance of attracting, retaining more doctors and nurses. You also have a better chance of better health outcomes because the health service itself suffers from these same pressures. And there is data out there that says that, for example, in the American health service, they kill over 100,000 people a year as a consequence of misdiagnosis occasioned by stress or overwork. So actually, this starts to become an incredible virtuous circle if we can actually get this in place, that not only do we make our workforce healthier and happier, it then cascades through things like the health service, which means ultimately better health benefits, better health outcomes, and that in turn leads yet again to even more health in the workforce. The environmental benefits are also quite significant. Now, okay, it's slightly been skewed now by the whole concept of the work from home movement. But, you know, UC Davis said quite simply that not going into work is one of the most environmentally sustainable things that you can do as an individual employee. And what we've also seen is that when you do have more time at home, you also generally are engaged in lower carbon outcomes in terms of that free time. So this has the potential, on top of the work from home movement, to actually create a massive beneficial outcome as far as, you know, in the environmental situation is concerned, and our ability to materially reduce greenhouse gases. Now, I've said I got to the point where I couldn't drink that much coffee. So this is a shameless plug for the book, which says actually, you know, if you're interested, by all means, go and grab a copy, either Audible or Kindle, or an actual real book. And what I put in there was not, you know, philosophy about it. It was literally a practical how-to-do guide on how you implement a 4-day week in your company. Now, I'd like to close, and then we'll take some questions by saying, you know, this is the best thing I've ever done in my whole career in business. And I say that because not only has it materially changed the lives of the people in my organization, and now we're seeing, you know, the chance to change the lives of people all around the world, but actually it fundamentally has made my business better. So when, for example, we hit lockdown in New Zealand, all but 200,000 people in the country were either being paid directly by the government or were on furlough. We didn't take a cent. We missed, I think, a record profit 1 month by $27,000. We did 2 months after that record profits. This is because my organization has learned how to be resilient. It's learned better teamwork. It's learned how to do things more efficiently. It's learned how to cooperate in a way that, you know, we never thought possible. And consequently, our business is now twice as profitable on a per capita basis as our nearest competitor. Your biggest risk is not implementing a 4-day week. Your biggest risk, without exception, is that your biggest competitor does this first. Thank you. Happy to take some questions.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for this presentation, and so much to chew on and think about coming out of this. I will just remind our audience that the questions box is your portal to communicate with us. So any questions that are coming to your mind right now, please don't hesitate to pop them in as we continue with our Q&A section of this presentation. So we are kicking things off with a data question, and a question just curious around the measurement of productivity. So how did you go about measuring productivity?
I love this question. I love this question so much because it comes up every time. Everybody says, well, how do you measure productivity? Okay, I'm going to throw it straight back at you. how are you measuring productivity? And that's the point. What we did is conventionally we use time as a measure of productivity, and we turn around and say, well, how long have we spent? You measure productivity the same way as you did before, and if you weren't measuring productivity before, work out how you measure it. Now, part of that, because I wasn't, let's face it, we knew we weren't either, particularly we're a service company, so sometimes it's harder. So we actually said to people in the organization, well, how should we measure you? How do we know that what you're doing this week is delivering the same output? So what you do is, if you aren't measuring productivity beforehand, as a consequence of doing this, you get measurements of productivity. But of course, the real question is, if you're asking that question, you're not measuring productivity. You're measuring something else.
All right. Good to think about, good conversations. The next one we have starts off with a wonderful thank you to you, and just a comment on how tangible and realistic this talk has been. So that's wonderful. And following up with, how do you prevent, so let's say you've implemented this and your trial is you're going well, maybe you've even made it permanent. How do you prevent that slide back to old habits?
Yeah, look, this is the French problem, right? So France, when it implemented the 35-hour week, saw a short-term spike in productivity, and then it slid. And the reason it slid was because, naturally, if there is no sanction, if I'm going to get paid as I would be normally, my full salary, but the hours have dropped, there is no incentive on me to continue to make those changes. So now, in our case, what we did with that is that we have, as what we call it, the productivity policy. So under New Zealand legislation, you have to measure normal hours, normal days of work, normal start time, normal finish time. So the problem about that is, if I'm trying to do a fully flexible, this day I might give you a Friday off, next day I might give you Tuesday off, or you might take a couple of half days or whatever. You can't do that under New Zealand legislation. So what we did is we created this opt-in policy. And what the opt-in policy clearly says is, it says, I will gift you 40 days off a year if you deliver me the same level of productivity. If you don't deliver me the same level of productivity, your contract of employment here says 5 days a week. Back you go to 5 days. Now, we've only ever had to use this once. That was during the trial, when we had one team that decided it would, where would take half of them would take Friday off, half of them would take Monday off, and then, surprise, surprise, customer service slipped. And so we said, right, no, that's not what we're talking about. Back to 5 days. We've never had to use it since. And that's why we think that's how we think it works, is to make sure that this is a honest conversation, and there's responsibilities both ways between employees and employers, that says, actually, it's about productivity. We've got to keep that up. That's the determinant. If we keep the productivity, you keep getting your 40 days. The only downside is I have to accrue 4 days leave on the 40 days I gift my staff off a year. And so I say, on the other hand, that you have to give 1 day a quarter to charity or community service. But we've never seen a backsliding since.
It's really that kind of two-way street, it seems, right? And as you mentioned, continue that conversation. We're continuing to get questions. It's so wonderful. So next up is, which measures of health and well-being did you find to be most reflective of employees' perspective and experience?
I can't say I had a particular favorite, to be honest. Look, I think the stress level one is quite important, right? Because the stress is the issue that drives a lot of things. I actually ran far more on, because my company was, it was 240 odd people. I was much more focused on going around the organization and having those conversations, the shared experiences. and just picking up the mood of the organization. But I think, looking at it, you've got to look at those stress ones. You've got to look at the stress ones. You've got to look at the ones which are talking about whether individuals are feeling more or less pressure, which is different from stress. Some people thrive on that, about a reduced hours working. And are they just happier? And there's some good data that's done by Oxford University on whether individuals are happier or not, and that actually is often quite a good driver of output productivity. And we say in the Navy, a good ship's a happy ship.
All right, wonderful. We have another person discussing a client that they have that's most recently implemented a 4-day work week, but with the employees working 10 hours per day for the 40 hours per week. There is pushback from some employees because they're working a longer day. So if you could kind of speak to that a little bit, and then the question
Look,
here is
I
reduced hours per day.
Yeah, push back on that one. I mean, we don't support that. If you come to us to go on a pilot saying we want to keep 40 hours a week, we want to split it over 4 days, you can't come on the pilot. If you said, if you want to say, well, look, I want to go from 5 full days to 4.5, it's a journey, we'd allow you on the pilot. But we're very clear: 180, 100, 80% time, 100% pay. It's not, there's all the statistics indicate that if you lengthen the working day, one, it increases the chance of your employees having a stroke or cardiac issue. It also indicates, when you look at the research, it's not great for productivity. Those last 2 hours aren't very good. And we've known about this for 100 years. There was a British munitions factory, First World War, that was producing shells for the Western Front. They dropped from 7 days to 6 days, and they found that productivity and output goes up. Working longer doesn't solve the problem. You got to work smarter, not longer.
All right, and kind of with that, you just spoke to some great points, but is there anything you would recommend to kind of change that conversation of what 4-day work week? How do you kind of start that of really the best practice is the actual reduced hours themselves?
I think luckily there's enough data around there. Go to the 4-day week website. Seriously, I mean, just at the bottom of the page. Go to the 4-day week website and have a look. There's good stuff. By the way, the next program we're bringing out is how to persuade your boss to do a 4-day week. Precisely for this, because what we're trying to do is make sure this is a very sensible, rational conversation. You're in great company if you're doing a 4-day week program. The organizations around the world that are doing this, I mean, Unilever's trialing it at the moment, for example. PricewaterhouseCoopers is going for it. EY is starting to look to do it. There are big name companies all over the world that are recognizing that we just have to rethink how we work. Because if you believe that the 5-day week is the pinnacle of human achievement, I mean, you got the wrong management, right?
Right. Okay, great. And if there are any extra links, please feel free. We can share them with our audience today for future further resources. So next question is around the mentoring that you mentioned within the trials. Just wanting a little bit more information on what that looks like.
Well, because as I said, this is quite a lonely decision for a chief exec. So we're trying to do two things. What we're trying to do is help the leadership team of an organization implement a 4-day week. And whilst this is not something that you can do from the C-suite, it's bottom-up process re-engineering, you have to have the confidence to do something which you're not wired to do. And we're leaders for a reason, because we've got solutions to problems. So what you've got to do here is you've got to step back. You've got to enable your people to come up with the solutions, but you in the C-suite have got to go, I'm not going to, this has got to come from you guys. Now, that requires a bit of, stepping off into the void for a lot of people. Now, that's why we think the mentor program works well, because then you've got somebody in your industry who's done it, has seen what's happened, understood what worked, what didn't work, and then is able to share that with you. And actually, you've also got that person off to the side when you're dealing with your own stakeholders, shareholders, board, and you're able to say, well, look, I've got so and so who's in a successful business in our field. This is what they did. This is what they find. And all of this is around trying to make it safer for stakeholders and leadership teams to actually, effectively implement a 4-day week. And as I said, this is a very, very, very generous industry or movement. That wherever you are in the world, you will find that people are prepared to make time, because I think we're all buying in to this concept that actually we've seen what happens in our organizations, and we want to see this change. We think this change is better for everybody.
Wonderful. A little bit of shift back into some possible kind of data land more around. Did you see any differences, or can you speak to around the duration of medical leave or less injuries, those more kind of health and safety things? Was that kind of talked to or spoken to at all within the trials and things you've seen so far?
Well, only that, obviously I mentioned us from our sick days statistics, we saw beneficial. We're an office-based organization, so the net result is we didn't really have the occupational health and safety stuff. The place to go for that, I'll have a look and see if they've got data on it, will be somebody like Volkswagen. And one of the theses around this, of course, is if you're rested, you don't make mistakes. You make mistakes generally when you're tired, when you're stressed. So if you drop stress and you're not as tired, the chances are you're going to be in a safer working environment as a consequence.
Okay, great. This is a little bit more of a situational, so just wondering if you have any comments on it. So our organization used to have a flex schedule in which, in exchange for a flex day off every 1, 2, 3 weeks, employees worked the longer hours. So this has come up again. I don't know that efficiency was measured or considered. Just any thoughts you might have on that kind of a flex policy?
I can guarantee it wasn't, and as we're quite clear. We that's not what we're about. We're about reducing the amount of time people work. Now, look, there are organizations, and we know them in New Zealand, they're working 60 hours a week. We don't say, look, get from 60 hours down to 32. We say, I don't know, get from 60 down to 52. It's a start.
Right.
It's all about reducing time. Anything else on this is what's happening is you're not re-engineering your business. Part of this is to eliminate those things that are stopping you being productive. Now, we've done this. Anybody who obviously works in office-based environments will know how many times do you attend a meeting you shouldn't be at? How many times does it drag on without an agenda and you really are just wasting time? You know that. How many times do your most productive people, because they're the best people, they just keep getting interrupted? And so they're not actually doing their work. So then they have to stay late, and that puts them under more pressure. So this is really about, seriously having a conversation about how you rethink how your business works. And what you're looking to do is find those little hacks. Because remember, to a Canadian audience, if you guys are only productive for 1.5 hours a day, to replace that one, if I drop a day, you only got to find 18 minutes of more productive time in for each of 4 days to do the same, right? Now, I don't believe the 1.5. I'm being generous, right? But in general terms, the statistics around the world do coalesce around about 3 hours of true productivity. That's not, am I busy? Am I doing things? It's about output-based analysis that says, in reality, there's about 3 hours of proper productivity in a day.
Wow. So last question, as we're already at the top of the hour, which is wonderful, such great conversation here. So just curious, with the universities that you've mentioned have been involved, have any of them implemented the 4-day work week? Those kind of involved on the research side, have they been able to implement it for themselves?
It is starting, is the answer. It is
Mm-hmm.
absolutely starting. Interestingly, the University of Stanford Medical School is on a 4-day week.
Oh,
And
nice.
they were involved in some research about 5 years ago, which is on this. And as the program started, it sort of to filter back into there. But yes, we're starting to see some of the higher education establishments now start to look at this. The problem, of course, is a lot of these government funded, certainly around the world, and therefore you've got to finesse government involvement in that.
Mm.
But again, that's changing. So, for example, in Valencia, in Spain, the University of Valencia will, as part of the city of Valencia's trial program, will also go on to a 4-day week, is my understanding. And when you look at the educational outputs from school districts in the United States, there is no statistical variation uh, about academic outcomes as a consequence of working a 4-day week. What they are finding, of course, it's a lot easier to attract and retain teachers, especially in poorer
Nice.
districts.
Wonderful. It's very exciting to hear just how much this is permeating into all of these different types of industries, as you've mentioned. So we will have to close here, and I'll just take a couple minutes to do some closing remarks. But I'll also thank our audience. And there's actually, if everyone wants to take a look, another look at efficiency and an example of a manufacturer moving to 6-hour shifts but paid for 8. So take a look at that to continue the conversation. Otherwise, just to close out, thank you so much for participating, such a participatory audience, and having such a great discussion right to the very end here. As mentioned previously, we have recorded this session, and that will be available to you through our website and our eCampus, and will be sent out to you with presentations post this presentation. For our members, organizational ARPA Australia, as well as our individual WWI members, you will receive your automatic certificates of attendance. And if that's something that has perked your ear, please do look at our membership portion of our website to look at what that membership entails, and please feel free to email membership services at workwellnessinstitute.org for any questions. An evaluation survey will pop up for you as we end this session today. Please take that very short amount of time to fill that in, as we do use that to ensure our timeliness and relevancy, and all of our resources are what our audience is looking for. All of our webinars are created for public access and supported by memberships and funding sponsors. And you can always look to our courses section on our website to know all of our full programming, topics, dates, times, speakers, all of those wonderful things. Once again, a huge thank you to you, Andrew, and to our audience today for such a wonderful conversation. Lots of food for thought, and I'm sure lots of discussions to continue to be had after today. And I will look forward to seeing you all again in future educational resources. And I'll look to end the session here. Thank you so much again, Andrew, for your time.
Thank you.